continuing in our readings from Mark for the summer. Our lesson is from Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha, come," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat.
The next message is from Hazel. She is not here today, but she sent us her message. I think all of you would agree that Hazel is one of our biblical scholars. I have gone to her many times and benefited from her knowledge, and I think many of you are right with me in that. So although she can't be here, she shared some knowledge about the book of Mark that we are studying. So this is some background knowledge from Hazel. Mark is a Jew by birth. His mother was a woman of wealth who was influential among the early Christians. So Mark was acquainted with the ministry of Jesus from an early age, or from the time Jesus started, I should say. He may well have been a witness to some of the gatherings of Jesus and his followers. Tradition has it that he was the young man who, in a later chapter of Mark, we'll read about this later, I think it was Mark 14, I had this figured out and written down, but I left the paper at home, of course. So tradition has it he was the young man who was clad with a linen cloth and who fled when Jesus was arrested that night in the garden when Jesus was arrested. Mark depicts Jesus' servant as a son of man who came to not to be ministered unto, but to minister to and to give his life as a ransom for men. So Hazel shared with us again that Mark says Jesus is the servant among us. And then in the book of Mark, the figure of Christ moves before us with a majesty and a reality which is unsurpassed. As well as being a biblical scholar, I also see Hazel as being a historian of our church. And if you want to know anything about our church, you ask Hazel. She has that information. And she's sharing two tidbits with us today. One is that Matthew is the one with the scroll over on our left. The scroll depicts the generations. Jesus as the Messiah, the account of Jesus the Messiah, son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, who was the father of Jacob, and so on down the scroll. On the altar on the right side is John with the eagle. And we remember John is saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Jesus. This is a Christmas message we hear, and we like to hear all through the year. So that's a message from Hazel, and we will continue on with our offering.